All right, let's jump right in. We're going to try and unpack one of the most complicated, long-running conflicts on the entire planet. It's a story all about land, faith, and identity with roots that go back thousands of years. Let's see if we can make sense of it together.
So what's the big question here? It's this. Why has this one specific piece of land been at the center of so much conflict for so long? To really understand the headlines we see today, we've got to unravel a story that stretches back centuries. Okay, let's get into it.
To get our bearings, let's start with what the map looks like right now. This will help us understand all the names and places we hear about in the news today.
The map itself really tells you a lot. You've got Israel, that's the part in yellow, and then you have what's called Palestine, which is split into two areas that don't even touch, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And right in the middle, like the absolute heart of it all, is Jerusalem. It's so critical to this conflict that it's one of the biggest hurdles to finding peace. We'll get into exactly why a little later.
So, to really get why that map looks the way it does, we've got to rewind. The whole story of these modern borders was really written in the 20th century, shaped by huge political shifts and world events.
The story of modern Israel really kicks off with an idea, right? An idea called Zionism, this political movement to create a national state for the Jewish people. And this idea, it went from just a concept to a real possibility when the British Empire, right in the middle of World War I, threw its weight behind it with something called the Balfour Declaration. Britain eventually took control of the land, but after decades of fighting and tension, they basically threw their hands up and passed the problem over to the brand new United Nations.
But you know, not everyone was on board with this plan. Not by a long shot. Major world leaders, including Mahatma Gandhi, were pretty vocal in their opposition. He argued that, look, this land belongs to the Arabs who live there, just like England belongs to the English.
And you can see the impact right here in this chart. It's dramatic. With British policy making it easier and terrible persecution rising in Europe, Jewish migration just exploded. I mean, look at those numbers. In just a few decades, the population grew almost 7 times over. That's a massive demographic shift for any region to handle.
And you have to remember what was driving this migration. It was the absolute unimaginable horror of the Holocaust. 6 million, that's 60 lakh, Jewish people were systematically murdered by the Nazis. So for the people who survived, the idea of creating a safe homeland wasn't just a political goal anymore. It felt like an existential necessity. So what did the UN do? They came up with this partition plan. But just look at the numbers here. It's pretty stark. The Jewish population, even with all the migration, was still about a third of the total population, and they owned only about 6% of the land. Yet the UN's plan was to give them a state that was roughly the same size as the new Arab state. You can imagine, from the Arab point of view, this division just seemed completely unfair.
And as you can probably guess, that UN map didn't bring peace. Not at all. In fact, it was the starting gun for open war and decades of organized resistance that are still going on today.
The day after the British left in 1948, it all kicked off. A whole coalition of neighboring Arab countries, we're talking Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and others, attacked the brand new state of Israel. Honestly, everyone expected them to just roll over the new country. But that's not what happened. In a pretty shocking turn of events, Israel actually won the war, and in winning, they took control of way more land than the UN plan had ever set aside for them. And the years after that? Well, it was just one escalation after another. The Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, was formed to fight for a Palestinian state. But then, in 1967, in what's known as the Six-Day War, Israel won again, this time capturing the West Bank and Gaza. This huge defeat really pushed the PLO towards more and more extreme tactics, everything from hijacking airplanes to that tragic attack on Israeli athletes at the 1972 Munich Olympics.
And it's really important to get this. The PLO's original goal wasn't a compromise. Their stated aim was the total liberation of Palestine, which, in their view, meant the complete removal of the State of Israel. But then, something big changed. By 1988, after so many years of fighting, the PLO made a massive strategic pivot. They basically acknowledged that winning a total victory just wasn't likely. So, they officially accepted the idea of a two-state solution, an independent Palestine living side by side with Israel. This was a huge deal, echoing that original UN plan from decades earlier.
But here's the thing, that move toward diplomacy, it didn't result in a Palestinian state. And so a lot of Palestinians just lost faith in the PLO's leadership. They felt the whole peace process was a failure. And that disillusionment created a vacuum, an opening for a group called Hamas. They were more radical, they rejected negotiations, and they were ready to continue the armed fight
often getting support from other countries in the region.
Okay, so we've looked at the politics, the wars. Now we have to peel back one more layer, the final layer, to get to the ancient religious core of this whole thing, the city of Jerusalem. Because this is where the conflict stops being just about land and becomes about something much, much deeper.
This one spot, this one hill, tells a 3,000-year-old story of building, destroying, and rebuilding. First, King Solomon builds the first Jewish temple, right here. It gets destroyed. Then it's rebuilt as the second temple, and then the Romans come and destroy that. Centuries go by, and then on the very same foundations, two of Islam's most sacred sites, the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, are built.
So think about that. This tiny piece of land, just 37 acres, is profoundly holy to three of the world's biggest religions. For Jews, it's the Temple Mount, the absolute holiest site in Judaism. For Christians, it's where Jesus taught and was crucified. And for Muslims, it's the Haram al-Sharif, their third holiest site after Mecca and Medina. When you have that much sacred meaning packed into one small space, it's bound to be an intense flashpoint.
So you've got these ancient religious claims piled right on top of modern politics and military conflict. It begs the question, is a real, lasting peace even possible?
And this is where it gets really tragic. It's a real dilemma for peacemakers. On both sides, almost every single leader who has genuinely tried to make a compromise has faced a huge, sometimes violent backlash from their own people. Some get voted out, and some, like the Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, have even been assassinated by their own extremists for trying to make peace.
This quote just says it all, doesn't it? As soon as the PLO started talking about peace and diplomacy, and it didn't deliver a state for the Palestinians, their power started to fade. People felt let down, and that's when Hamas grew stronger, because many saw them as the only group still truly fighting for their cause.
The sheer complexity of this forces other countries into really tricky positions, and you can see that really clearly in India's own foreign policy. For a long time, India was a staunch supporter of the Palestinian cause, but later on, new economic and strategic needs led them to open up diplomatic relations with Israel. So today, they're performing this incredibly delicate balancing act, trying to keep their historical ties with the Arab world while also building a modern partnership with Israel.
And so, we end right back where we started, with the hardest question of them all. After thousands of years of worship, of war, of displacement, who really has the right to this holy city? There's just no easy answer. And that right there is why this conflict is still with us today.